This is Viticulture, where we share conversations with makers, growers, thinkers, and doers, folks who cultivate a good life. My name is Chris Missick, and I'm a lawyer turned winemaker in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, and I'm sitting down with great people in wine and other walks of life to hear their stories, learn their lessons, and take their advice on the perfect pairing. Today, I'm speaking with Katerina Axelsson, who, while working towards her BS in chemistry from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, paid her way through college by working in a large regional wine chemistry lab. Her hard work ethic and obsession with unlocking the secrets of sensory science and consumer preference led her down the path towards tech startup, entrepreneur, and CEO. Today she leads Tastree, touted as being the world's first artificial intelligence-driven sensory sciences company, with a tagline that Tastree taught a computer to taste. From my research, there's a chance that Tastree is about to revolutionize the global wine industry with a variety of models to connect boutique wineries with as yet unknown customer bases, those seeking AI-based blending solutions, and an overall deeper understanding of exactly what is in our wines. If you like this podcast, please be sure to rate us 5 stars in Apple Podcasts and like our videos on YouTube. It really helps with the ratings and in introducing new folks to the show. Don't forget to visit our website at viticulturepodcast.com, and please subscribe to our Substack, where you'll get show notes, transcripts, musings, and exclusive offers. And don't forget to visit and share all of our content on all the major social media platforms. As we wrap up Season 1, harvest is approaching. New interview shows are on their way to help you get through Crush, but posting will quiet down for a few weeks as we find ourselves consumed with cellar work. Be sure to look out for Season 2, as well as some special shows. Also, remember to subscribe to our Substack, as we'll introduce a new podcast-only feature in Season 2 that I think you're going to like. You can also hit the tip jar while you're there. And now, here's the show. Welcome to Viticulture, where we discuss ways to make a good life. And as you know in this show, we talk with makers through a lot of different paths of their lives, whether they are making wine or growing grapes, which is a big emphasis of the show, to musicians and artists. And today we're talking with a tech CEO, a founder of a fascinating company called Tastree. We have Katerina Axelsson on the show today, and we're going to explore some of the ways her business is helping consumers, producers, and retailers reach the world of wine. It's fascinating, and I can't thank you enough for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Definitely. And we've talked a little bit before the show, but you're in San Luis Obispo today. We have really incurred a deluge of rain these last couple of weeks. You're dry and droughty. I wish we could trade a little bit of our precipitation.
That would be very nice. It'd be nice to have some moisture here.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm from California originally, grew up in Southern California. I'm familiar with San Luis Obispo, which is where you are now. And I've mentioned to you in the past, but this is really one of my favorite wine regions in California. It's just so down to earth. The wines are delicious. Got to get out there and spend some more time.
Please come on by. We'll make sure to give you the full treatment.
Thanks. And I'd love to get a tour of your facility. And so before we go into some of your background, how you got involved, how you started Tastree, I'd like to have the listeners have a sense of what Tastree does. Because when I first started researching about it, and I mean, you've had a ton of news articles, everyone from CNN to Forbes writing about you this year. I came to it with the mindset of kind of your classic small boutique winemaker where you look at acids, you look at sugars. If you get really intense, you might pull out something like anthocyanins or catechins and alcohol. But you break wine down on a much deeper level. I'd love for you to share a little bit of what you do at Tastree.
Sure. So we like to say we taught a computer how to taste. And as you can imagine, there's a variety of use cases where that type of technology would apply. So in short, I would say Tastree is a sensory sciences company, and we used, and I will explain how, advanced chemistry methodology and machine learning algorithms to first match consumers to products that they will love, and second, to use the data on that unique chemistry to help wineries either understand their market of opportunity or formulate products or do things like ameliorate the damages of smoke taint by looking at the chemistry. So we're vertically integrated, so we work with both retailers and manufacturers and then all the way down to the consumer. But we're really just using these two key proprietary data sets that we've created. One is on the chemistry of products, and one is on the aggregate palettes of consumers across the U.S. market. So, we're a B2B insights company, really, and recently, yes, we've been working especially closely with the wine industry, and that's been very rewarding. Happy to dive into the tech as well.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, it's interesting. We don't deal with smoke taint in the Finger Lakes. In fact, the only fires you really see in vineyards are brush fires or, people burning brush, or to help raise the temperature of vineyards during really sensitive periods. But we know it's a huge issue in Napa. What exactly would your approach be when you look at how you could ameliorate smoke taint, for instance?
Oh, well, I think in order to answer that question, I'd love to talk about, I guess, the uniqueness or rather robustness of the chemistry. So we do have a unique analytical chemistry methodology that was developed, after several years of R&D with wine experts, PhD sensory scientists, and of course, AI professors. And first we had to learn what everyone else was doing. So I was talking to, researchers at multi-billion-dollar companies who were creating flavors and fragrances, and I was trying to understand how are they understanding what consumers like and don't like. And it felt like everyone was stuck at identifying if this compound or this flavor will express itself in this product. And they're usually trying to solve that by quantifying, say, benzaldehyde, and does it equal cherry? But the problem is, the hypothesis is that there's a flavor matrix effect in the chemistry that's masking or expressing the compound you're originally looking for. And so it's not very predictable. And then on top of that, we all have unique biology and we perceive things differently. I mean, you can have 3 expert tasters say this tastes like, apple, and the other 3 will say it tastes like pear, and there's really no ground truth to taste. But the good news is, the thing we discovered is that even though we do have a method to predict how the majority or the bell curve of the population will perceive the taste or smell of a certain product, there's actually very little relationship between that and whether or not they like the product. Like if I'm drinking this coffee, I'm not going to buy it again because it tastes like cherry, for example. I'm going to buy it because I like it. So that's what our technology is focused on. It's predicting whether or not you're going to like a particular flavor matrix relative to your palate. So the methodology we invented, yes, of course, it looks at polyphenols, and we do get measurements of alcohol and residual sugar as a side effect of what we do, all the basic panels. But we're looking at the chemistry in one snapshot in the correct ratios, the same way the human palate would. And that's why we say we taught a computer how to taste. I think there was another part to that question, but that's how the technology works. And then, sorry, what was the other part of your question?
No, just sort of getting this idea. So you break down, how many compounds?
So it's hundreds of compounds. It depends on if it's a red wine or a white wine. And it depends on, you could say, like the resolution at any
Yeah.
given moment. That's part of our secret sauce. So I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. But we are looking at things down to the ion count, so we know how much of each molecule or compound is
Mm.
in there. But that's less important to us again than the ratios of those compounds. Um,
Yeah.
so it's very difficult to create a methodology that looks at everything in one
Yeah.
snapshot, and we felt like that was an important problem to solve, because when you're drinking wine, when you're experiencing wine, that's what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
You have this chemical soup of flavors in your mouth that you're experiencing all at once, as opposed to one
You know,
compound at a time. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and so that AI component is necessary
Mm-hmm.
because for a lab technician to try and gather all of these data points and make any sense out of it, like we just don't have the brain power. Um, but you're able to, with this algorithm, examine all those things and actually find patterns.
Right. Well, it's very complex. Wine is a very chemically complex product, which is why we had to employ machine learning algorithms to understand all those interdependencies and relationships. And it's not a one-to-one relationship, right?
Yeah.
So my puny human brain couldn't possibly comprehend all the chemical complexity and all the interactions that are occurring at any given moment. And I wouldn't even say that there's explanatory power behind that beyond, some trends we can observe. I would say, I know that if we do this, that we're going to get this very, very positive outcome, and we can
Yeah.
efficacy test for that. And that's what we've been doing.
I, I find it particularly interesting because there are any number of different apps out there that have the 5 or 6 question tests. Like,
Yeah.
do you like apples? Do you like bananas? Do you like creme brulee? Um, and they just never seem to steer in a really fine point direction.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what you've been able to do, right?
Yeah, I would say there are a lot of, marketing type quizzes out there to help people feel like they're getting a personalized selection. And I've largely seen them used to sell a certain online wine inventory. I would say
Hmm.
I know how that technology works, and I have to say that the quiz, this deceptively whimsical quiz, it does have so much more behind it. For example, when you're answering that questionnaire, in the case of Tastree, it's not just filtering tasting notes and binning you into an archetype of wine drinker. What's happening on the back end, even though it looks quite simple, is that question bank was generated from a multi-hundred question bank, and the
Yeah.
AI determined which questions to ask suited to that inventory, and then it's looking at how you answered all those questions in combination
Hmm.
with each other, and then it's taking that data, plotting it in a multidimensional space along with the wine chemistry, and pinpointing your palate relative to that flavor matrix. So it's like a 5 or 6 step process. So
Yeah.
it's not a tasting note filter. And again, we didn't go that simple route because we found that filtering by tasting notes doesn't actually help you discover the wine you like. But we
Yeah.
needed to address consumers who, can't come to Tastree and tell us, oh, I like these 20 wines. Find me a wine similar to that. A lot of consumers out there wouldn't be able to tell me that, especially people who are newcomers to exploring wine. And they're the ones that really want the most help, right?
Yep.
So we needed to design a method that would get you to a wine you're going to love very quickly without having any prior experience with wine. Yeah.
So, incumbent with all the research you've done is this concept of these heat maps
Mm-hmm.
that you've developed, correct?
Yeah.
So, what you're able to do is see macro and micro trends down into even cities. I think a good example would be this for a producer. We make a lot of Riesling in the Finger Lakes. And Riesling, though we sell a lot of it in the United States, isn't one of consumers' top choices. Oftentimes they think it's too sweet. We make a lot of dry Riesling. But what we're able to do, if we were able to pair up with a company like you, is you could pinpoint specific markets where the trend is, you know what, dry Riesling will sell really here. And it might not even be something on our radar. And is that a growing side of your business?
Absolutely. I think that side of the business it exploded around the time e-com did, because many of the wine brands were getting into e-com for the first time when their primary source of revenue was shut down, and there's an opportunity to explore new markets, but those are new markets. There's no like history or data from your brand's perspective on those markets, so identifying a market of opportunity quickly seemed to be very important to a variety of wine brands, and we see it as a risk mitigation engine first and foremost, right? So if we can tell you, hey, this is where your customer base is, it's not in Boston, it's in South Beach, Florida, and it's a very similar customer base than what's in Northern California, we can provide insight like that, then you can get to the customer base that is going to love and evangelize your product that much faster, which means you're going to get your the ROI for your efforts much faster. Yeah.
And it seems like even, especially for direct, I mean, you could do some really great online marketing and advertising, but it could also be a really good sales pitch for finding distributors as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah, a lot of times, especially smaller regions. I mean, name any small region in the country that's producing wines. Michigan. They're able to go to a distributor who maybe has never sold a Michigan wine and say, hey, we've got plenty of data that shows there's a market here. We should do some business together. Well, how do you develop these heat maps? Is that in working with retailers, chains?
Yeah. So what happened is when we first launched Tastree after years of developing the technology with no business model, the first product we ever brought to market was the personalized wine recommender, and we exposed that to grocery retail so they could plug into the Tastree intelligence, so to speak, through various mediums, whether it be their website or app or even an iPad at the end of a wine aisle. And they would provide personalization to their customers, and customers would take this deceptively whimsical quiz and then get recommendations for products in the store. Well, over time, as our presence in retail grocery grew, we started to notice that people's aggregate preferences. We're not looking at individual data points. We're just looking at trends. They vary quite dramatically on a store or a local or regional level. And the funny part is that the inventory was more similar than the palettes were. So we started to notice that we can help the retailer optimize their assortment to improve the customer experience and to reduce waste on the shelf. So that's how the concept of the heat map was born, is just we just started to see regional or local trends in the data.
So another aspect, just to kind of tie some of the business side together, is how wineries individually would engage Tastree. And what I take from that is we basically would, whether it is bottled or whether you're looking for assistance in blending, let's say, provide samples. You would run this full analysis and then provide us with information. What is some of the information that you can provide to producers of all sizes, from boutique to Gallo?
Sure. So first thing you would do is ship us a bottle to our lab. I think we charge like $200. But for that you get, I forgot, it's many multiples more of value of just the basic chemistry panels you would always get. So you get the chemistry panels on that product in addition to a few things. I'll find out what that is. And then that gives you access to a dashboard you can log on to where you can see how your brand compares against, say, the 1,000 most common wine brands in the market, broken down by region or area of interest. And we also look at how you're doing against your competitive set. So, if you're a Zin or a Big Bold Red, how would you do in this area versus this area? And what percentage of the palettes it broadly or specifically does your wine match to? Or if we were to provide recommendations, what percentage of the people would find this wine in their top 10 or top 100? So we can break it down every which way. Happy to give you a demo one of these days. It's a relatively complex product, but simple to use once you get the hang of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I was thinking about that sort of in this reference. If you're a producer, we make a lot of off-dry Riesling as well. And I could easily see how it compares to the big dog of American Riesling, Chateau Ste. Michelle, and where that might fit in the preference scale for consumers. It's fascinating because it sort of brings to mind this whole other side of the wine industry of like wine competitions, right? Where there's one subjective day where judges get together and choose a gold medal or best of class. But no one is actually having to taste the wine. It really is just, it's math and the chemistry of it. It'd be interesting to have a Tastree competition of awards, I guess that sort of happens though in the market. We see who's selling more wine. I want to explore some of your personal background. What led you to the point where you were able to start Tastree, bring people together, and then talk a little bit more about, I guess, some philosophical issues related to this, because, and I've told you this before, but I know that there are some winemakers who think, I'm just trying to make the most representative wine from my small parcel of land, and if people like it, great. I don't need a computer to tell me what to do. And I think we've covered, this isn't necessarily about a computer telling us what to do. This is about us finding markets for our product, and maybe making better decisions in the future.
Yeah.
But how did you get to this point where you're in San Luis Obispo with a wine tech company?
Yeah. Wow. Two-part question. Okay, I'll get to the winemaker part next. So
yeah, we'll explore that part later.
Cool. So I paid my way through college by working as a chemist and various other tasks in the wine industry. We have, 400 wineries here in a 40-mile radius, something like that. So I worked in the wine industry quite a bit, and that's where you can say maybe being naive or a newcomer to the industry, I noticed what seemed to be an idiosyncrasy for me, which was there was a very large batch of wine that was made, and it was placed under two different labels, and then it went out into the market and was actually priced differently and marketed differently and ended up receiving different scores from the same critics. That's as far as I'll go in explaining that. But it just seemed strange that there could be this fog of intuition that ends up being kind of not transparent to consumers, and maybe the process could be more efficient if there was some more data kind of embedded into this process. So I thought, maybe if I look at the chemistry, I could help mitigate first some risk in launching a product that's not going to do so well, which is a major concern for any CPG or FMCG type product. And second of all, help connect consumers to that product more efficiently. And that's how the idea that I can create a chemistry methodology that could do this was born. And then a couple years later, I took that research to a PhD in computer science who taught mathematics and artificial intelligence, and he figured out a way how to add context to this data, and we ended up combining our two inventions and patenting it. And then, so the technology came before the business, but it really was just a learning experience where I was trying to figure out what's the status quo and how are people currently doing things and how can I make it better. And I had something to prove. So that's really how Tastree was born.
And based on just some of the other videos I'd seen, I mean, you became obsessed with this. You were in the lab, like in these early days, nonstop, pulling data sets and having all this information.
Yeah, you could say I ended up doing much more of that than actual college. It was, there was a period of obsession, for sure.
Yeah. That's important, though, I think, for, whether it be a tech entrepreneur or a maker of any sort, you have to be so involved with what you're trying to build and love it so much that the hours just disappear. That's what you experienced, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, you're pulling all this data out. You hadn't quite approached really the AI side of it yet. What was your thought? Were you thinking this is going to be a company? Was this something you had just become really curious about? Because that was a lot of groundwork to lay for something you weren't sure where it was going to go.
Honestly, I didn't know what it was, and I didn't really know what I had. I just had a hypothesis, and I created this, I did a lot of research, and I intuitively created this method to address the problems that I saw. But the reason I looked for a expert in data science and then AI was because the data was so robust and overwhelming to manage that I didn't understand how to render insight from it anymore. If I had processed that data on my own, it would have taken me like 16,000 years. So I needed a more efficient way to look at it. Only later did I realize that AI could really solve the problem by helping us render valuable insight from that data. So it definitely was a team effort.
Yeah. And were these professors at Cal Poly?
Yes. Professor Dektiar is his name. Yeah.
Nice. So when you bring all of these data sets to him, like, was he excited by it? Did he sort of see where this could go?
Yeah, I think he saw it immediately, maybe more quickly, I would say. So I set up a meeting with him saying, "Hey, can you help me understand a little bit about data science, because I need to process this enormous data set." And he said, "Okay, I'll talk to you for half an hour." And then after looking at the data and I explained my concept, it turned into an all-day meeting, and he ended up inviting other PhDs into the room, and they started looking at the data and coming up with various ideas. So he definitely saw the value in it very quickly.
So one of the things that I'm just curious about is, are you someone who loves wine? Is he someone who loves wine? Was there something about this product that drew it to you, or was it more the challenge of integrating this information and making it useful?
I would say it was 50-50. I do love wine. I especially like cooler climate whites, actually, and I love sparkling wine. They call me Bubbles here at Tastree.
And I promised to get a bottle out. I apologize. It will be coming very shortly. So
I'm so excited to analyze it. I mean, drink it. I also had as an aspiring scientist, I had a curiosity as to how to solve the problem. I think which made it a killer combo, at least for me.
Yeah. So when does the business actually get off the ground?
Must have been early 2019, three years coming out of R&D. And we started with piloting the Tastree recommender in some small select grocery retailers. And then when that went well and we demonstrated a lift in sales and margin and customers loved the recommendations, then we expanded from there. And then we went national and had very large multinational channel partners. And, around the time COVID hit, we had enough data to start helping wineries render insight on their product.
I mean, that just strikes me as, that's a long time to really work at this. 3 years. Were you prepared to have that sort of a lead time before you were able to launch? And how did you handle just sort of like the business mindset of it? Because it's a brave new world in terms of being a tech entrepreneur, and your specific invention isn't something, I don't want to say as simple, but so I distribute through Substack, and I love that concept, but they basically reworked something that had been around for a long time, an email newsletter. And I'm sure they worked really hard on their software, but they were able to get that program running pretty fast.
Yeah.
One, I guess, the mindset of what it took for you from, all those years to today being featured in international press and seeing the business grow. And two, some of those lessons you've taken along the way about starting a business like this and running a business like this.
That's a good question. I would say I expected, developing a new technology would take time. It's difficult to gauge exactly how long it would take, right? I think we knew what we needed, and to an extent we knew what we needed to do to get there, but discovery or innovation happens at its own pace, and we wanted to get it right. And then you have to further complicate things with, do you have the resources to achieve that? And at the same time, I'm trying to understand, how is this going to be applicable to the industry? Like how is it actually going to be, this technology going to be helpful? Because that kind of affects how we want to further develop it or what we want to optimize it for. So all this was happening at once. I would say the biggest piece of advice I would give someone is, well, maybe I'll borrow it. I'll borrow it from Ben Horowitz, I think, is just, don't give up and continue to iterate. I would say I've met so many brilliant entrepreneurs and brilliant minds over the years, and they just give up so soon because they expected it to take a year or a year and a half. And if they had just kept going, or at least tried a different way a couple more times, they would have eventually gotten there. I firmly believe that. And Ben Horowitz says, I've met so many entrepreneurs over the years, and the ones who were moderately successful usually have a different reason for their success. They'll say it was the business model, or the timing, or the execution, or the funding. But when he meets the entrepreneurs he considers to be truly great, their answers as to why they were successful are eerily similar. And that is, I just didn't give up, and I kept iterating. So that's my answer.
No, that's great. So do you have a team now? I think one of the things we talked about in the past was how important the people you surround yourself with are to the ultimate success of that business. How is it you were able to sort of select a good dynamic team to move this company forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're currently a 31-person, still very, very tech-heavy team. As a startup, things can get quite unpredictable, especially in the earlier stages. So one tactic I took when hiring people or recruiting them to the cause, if they were already interested, was I tried to convince them not to join. So I would say, this was earlier days, of course, but I would say, The pay is terrible. You're going to be working ridiculous hours. Mostly it's going to be thankless work, and we're probably not going to get it right the first or 32nd time. So your parents are going to be telling you to get a real job. So maybe this isn't for you. And, the people who understood that and knew what they were in for, but still persevered to the point where we are today, it worked out really well for them. So I think that was just my tactic, is find people who are self-motivated and resilient, who can make it through this startup, what do you call it, adversity. And yeah.
So one of the other important things, especially about starting a tech company, 31 people, I imagine a lot of engineers, is the difficulty oftentimes at first in financing that. You can't grow if you don't have the right people on board. What has your experience been like with fundraising rounds? And is this a part of the job you like or don't like?
Well, I used to not like it, but now I love it, because I'm not sure why. I think I've just grown into it, but we've been very fortunate in our ability to fundraise. So we've raised $6.4 million to date. That's largely funded the research and the technology we have today, and it started very small, right? So one of our first supporters was actually someone who's very prominent in the wine industry. And it was a similar conversation to the one I had with Professor Dektiar. I showed him the research. I was able to demonstrate the efficacy of the technology at that point, and I explained our vision. And they, someone from the wine industry, they totally saw the potential value this could bring, and they bought into it and supported more research. And then we had more data and more evidence, and then we went to more investors, and it just kind of grew from there. So we've been fortunate that we've had support when we needed it to get to where we are today.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've talked about is really just the intense amount of time that it's taken you to get to where you are today. And in a lot of ways, the things I've gathered, whether it is the research on each specific wine, whether it is building out the infrastructure, this isn't something that any company can just come up with overnight if they're one of the large wine conglomerates, let's say. But you've actually had some interest from some of those folks. I'm curious, specifically with regards to this story. One, maybe how that unfolded, but two, the ability to say no when after so many years of working hard, there's a check, but you decided you wanted to pursue this in your own business and grow it on your own.
Yeah, that was a interesting experience. So I think the reason this major company approached us is, well, it's the wine industry, and people talk and word gets around, and we're working with an ever, increasing number of clients at this point, and they hear about our technology and the claims we're making, and naturally they're curious. So we set up a meeting, and it was certainly a probing conversation, because this major company has their own research lab. They have many more resources than we do. They have scientists working on problems every day, and they want to think, well, what's so special about you, right? So I didn't want, to have a 6-month conversation when everyone's just trying to reverse engineer everything the entire time. So I just said, I'll just prove to you that it works. Let's do an efficacy test. So we'll design it. Have an experimental design. We'll design this, and we'll prove to you that it works, and then we can continue the conversation. So the design was that they would send us blind samples of wine to our lab, just numbered samples. It was 125 of them, and we had no idea what we were testing, but they already had all the data on these products, and they were, nationally exposed wine brands that they have thousands of customer reviews on, focus group data on, and all this. So our objective was to test the chemistry of those wines and to predict how consumers had scored them out of 5 stars. So we provided the prediction, and then they revealed the result. And we had predicted we had predicted every single one of those wines within a tenth of a point, or in aggregate with about 93% accuracy. So we proved that we can test the chemistry of a wine and with 93% accuracy tell you how consumers in any given market will score that wine. So they were blown away and tried to buy the company. They were starting to have that discussion, and we said, I think it's way too early for us as a company to be having that discussion. We've barely hit the market. And then just one other piece to that, this is actually when we also performed one of our early compu blends, what we call computational blending, because then they came back to us and said, okay, I get that you can predict the future with 93% accuracy, and that mitigates some level of risk of us making a product that won't do so well in the market. But what happens if I don't like the future you're showing me? How do I change the outcome before it happens? And that's when we ran multiple permutations of that blend against our AI until we found the best performing one, and ended up increasing the retail value and quality of that wine by 207% while maintaining the cost. And we did it in 48 hours as opposed to taking 6 to 8 weeks. So that's one way of just like, I think, demonstrating that not only can we can mitigate the risk through various actions using the data. So that's the story. And you had another question in there. Why did I say no? I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've seen at this point, we've demonstrated at this point, I should say, quite a few ways how our technology works, and it's amazing. And I think everyone in the company at this point really believes this could provide a dramatic change and impact on the industry. And, once you really see something and believe in it, the value of it, and it's worth more than what someone's offering you. So it was worth it to us to try to go and continue this journey than just to take the check and call it quits at the end of the day.
Yeah. I particularly like that aspect of how you and your team are approaching this business. That happens a lot. And I just feel like part of the human life experiential benefit, maybe the most important benefit out of starting a business, isn't even the payday, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's knowing that you've made a mark. So I think that's great. So that brings us a little bit to the philosophy side. And again, this is for all my boutique winemaker friends out there who say, I don't want a computer blending my wine for me. And I'm going to expand on it just a little bit. So during the pandemic, wine.com had sales explode. And I remember hearing I think it was a podcast, maybe it was on NPR or something, but a story about how wine.com is actually employing a lot of the sommeliers that lost their jobs during the pandemic, working from home and basically offering consumer recommendations. Two things strike me. One, so there is a human interface there. That was pretty neat. I thought initially, because I signed on, I was like, I actually thought that these were just sort of auto reply type things. But you also have the ability to maybe hone those consumers into a direction that they might be happier with in terms of their wine selection. So the first part is from that I guess, place. Do you ever worry AI is going to take away jobs, make people's jobs less necessary?
That's a great question. I think it varies absolutely on a case-by-case basis. I think from what I've seen in the AI space, the companies that are successful at real AI nowadays are not companies that are replacing jobs. Now, I'm not talking about like automated driving or anything like this, but I am talking about companies similar to Tastree, like data and insight type companies. it's very hard to replace people. And I would also add that's not our goal. The successful AI companies are augmenting existing workflows. They're embedding themselves into existing workflows and enhancing what a human is doing, and making that human's job much, in many cases, I've seen more enjoyable. So that's how we see Tastree. First off, we love winemakers. I don't think would ever attempt to replace a winemaker or sommelier. I think they're artists, and there's I think a very important piece that is artistry here, that needs to be preserved. What we're trying to do is expose that artistry to the right consumer base. I know that was like a multiple part answer, and we could dive into like 7 different aspects of that. But what we found, I would explain, like looking at the data, is that your tiny wine label, your whatever X case winery, we know it's a screaming eagle for someone out there. We just have to find them. And what we've found is, one question we were always getting in the beginning is, aren't you just going to help everyone make an apothic red and all the wine on the planet's going to be the same? Well, we found that it's actually quite the opposite, because when you know that there's a market for your product out there, you actually have the confidence to kind of not revert to the mean and actually make that more interesting, experimental, clever wine, having the confidence that people will buy it. It is, that's what I've seen anyway.
I think that's a really good point, because if I did want to make an apothic red, you could help me do it. But that's not what you're trying to do.
No.
You're trying to make sure I can sell my unique lot to a customer base that I don't know exists.
Yeah, in a way, we've seen that a side effect of applying Tastree to retail and working with wineries is we're kind of leveling the playing field, and helping companies that don't have that multi-million-dollar budget to get brand recognition. We're helping customers find them through Tastree, and kind of surpass that marketing budget wine at the eye level on the grocery store shelf aspect.
So that is an interesting point. It's this concept of pigeonholing consumers into the same sort of brands. And just to call back the story from earlier, from the international large wine business that made an offer, it's almost more important that this company remains independent, because that could easily happen if one of these companies that really controls X large percent of the wine market, and it becomes widely adopted by consumers in retail.
Yeah, I do know some acquisitions happen just because the company doesn't want the competitors to get their hands on it.
Yeah. So it's interesting too, you mentioned sort of the uniformity that some people were initially expressed trepidation about before they understood the full business model. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but I just want to get your sense, because I have talked about AI before on the show. Episode I did with Bob Medill, we talked about it as applied to winemaking and vineyards, and concerns about the potential for uniformity. Guys like Nick Bostrom have written about, maybe it's the Netflix AI that becomes sentient and takes over the world, right? And then like everybody's just streaming all the time. Or the classic example of the paperclip manufacturer that becomes the first sentient AI, and next thing you know, the world's overrun in a gray goo of paperclips. Do you think about AI more generally, and how it may impact the future?
That's a really big question. Let me see how I can answer that. I'm more on the positive side of AI. I feel very positive about AI. Maybe that's because I think we're still just very good at generally intelligent AI, and not we haven't reached the singularity, and generally intelligent AI is solving a lot of problems faster, better, and cheaper, and we humans always want that, right? I think there are risks with bringing any new technology into the market, and I do think we have to be careful about that. But I remain optimistic, and I think there are a lot of people looking at and working on the ethics of AI and the dangers of AI. So that's my answer.
I'm just curious,
Yeah.
I'm either in the vineyard or the cellar. I don't get to talk to AI experts all the time. So I
I'm
hear
not an
on
AI
plenty of
expert.
podcasts. So where do you see the future of Tastree? You've come a long way in 2 years in the public space. Over the next 2 or 5.
Well, first I'll talk about Tastree in the context of the wine industry, and then I'll talk about Tastree and beyond. So what we're seeing now that we have traction on both sides of the supply chain, we're working with retailers and wine brands, is that we are getting this network effect happening with the data, where the more wine brands we're working with, the more beneficial that is for the retailers we're working with, and vice versa. Now we're at a stage where we're, in some cases, exposing the wineries we're working with to retailers. And we're kind of facilitating new relationships there. And I think we're starting to see, I don't want to give away too much, but there might be a way to, for lack of a better term, broker new collaborations between different parts of the supply chain using Tastree. So network effects, we're seeing big benefits there. And 5 years from now, actually much sooner than that, Tastree will be moving into other verticals. We're already making a lot of progress on beer and moving into spirits. And beyond that, we would be doing fragrance and coffee. We already have proven the technology works there, and we have efficacy for that. So one of these days, Tastree will just be a sensory sciences company.
It's fascinating because I've been fortunate enough to visit Grasse
Yeah.
in southern France with my wife. And for anyone who doesn't know, it is sort of the birthplace of fine perfume, and you can visit these fantastic old companies, and they're still distilling the essences of lavender right there.
Yeah.
And sort of the analog to the wine world is in Grasse, you have, I think, like it's this small number, maybe like 20 people who are called noses, right? So they have some super sensory olfactory sense of smell. But it made sense to me before we even talked about that, really what a perfect companion this is, not just for the beverage market, but things like fragrances as well.
Yeah, it's huge, and Grasse is amazing.
It is. It is. And then one other thing, did I read somewhere that you've paired up with a boutique winemaker wine club or something along those lines? I feel like I read an article where it was a way to match consumers with smaller wineries through some sort of wine club mechanism.
Yeah, there's a company called Yayin who is working with small wine brands and helping them ship across, 48 states? How many states can you ship to? The maximum number of states you can ship to. And they have plugged into Tastree on their site and are helping customers across the U.S. discover brands they wouldn't have discovered otherwise because they're relatively small. So that's a very fun project that we're passionate about.
Yeah. Well, this has been really excellent, Katerina. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think there's one small segment of craft beverage, the growth of seltzers. That might be one stumbling block, but wine is certainly here to stay, and craft beer, even in places like here in the Finger Lakes. I mean, it's just, there's some amazing producers out there. And the ability for us to connect with our consumer is important because it allows us to do what we love to do. At the end of the day, I can make as much wine as I want. If I can't sell it or I don't find the customers to buy it, I'm not going to get to keep doing what I love. So I appreciate all your efforts on that front.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Huh?
Yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like to share? Any closing words? Any thoughts?
Well, I think we've covered a lot, and I thank you for the opportunity to tell the world more about Tastree. I always love doing that. Nothing's coming to mind at the moment, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and I look forward to trying your wine and sharing it with the team here.
Well, we'll get that out very soon. So everybody can check out in the show notes for Tastree, but it's just as easy to Google it. And I can't wait to get some other Finger Lakes producers in on this and have some wine submitted and see what the data shows.
Absolutely.
So, well, I'm going to close this out. Thanks.
Thank you.
We've had the chance today to sit down with Katerina Axelsson of Tastree.com, a brand new company that's taken years to get to where they are. She's changing the way we perceive wine. She's helping consumers find the wines they want. And in the end, she's taking care to make sure that this is an industry that keeps growing and that small producers like us can keep doing what we love. Thanks for joining us on Viticulture. I hope you enjoyed this show. This has been Viticulture, where we share ways to cultivate a good life. Don't forget to visit our website at viticulturepodcast.com. Subscribe to our Substack, where you'll get show notes, transcripts, musings, and exclusive offers. And check us out on all the major social media platforms. Thanks again for stopping by.